Hello and welcome to the Monday, February 17th, 2020 edition of Tesla Daily, unofficial Tesla podcast. My name is Rob Maurer, and somehow we are already now halfway through, officially, through the first quarter of 2020. And we have some exciting news to talk about today, specifically on the range increases for Model S and Model X. We also have news on Model 3, some news from GM and Renault, and a couple other stories as well. Let's start off with Model S and Model X. I'm sure most people by now have heard of the range increases, so we'll go through that pretty quickly, and then I think there are a couple underappreciated elements of this that I also want to discuss. First up is Model S. Tesla has increased the estimated range on the Model S from 373 miles or 600 kilometers before to 390 miles or 628 kilometers now. So that's a 4.5% increase. And then for Model X, the range is increased from an estimated 328 miles or 528 kilometers to 351 miles or 565 kilometers, a 7% increase for the Model X, again versus that Model S increase of 4.5%. A variance that I haven't actually seen getting that much attention, but I think one that is pretty interesting. That's a pretty big discrepancy between Model S and Model X in terms of the percent increase. The other thing that is kind of interesting is that on the Model X design page, under range, it says EPA estimated, and on the Model S design page, it actually just says estimated without including that EPA specification. It probably doesn't mean anything, but taken in combination with the larger percent increase in range for X versus S, I do wonder if Tesla may still be understating the range on Model S. Now, looking at the Model 3 and Model Y design pages to see if that gives us any insight, they don't really help. The Model 3 doesn't actually have anything listed there. It doesn't say EPA estimate or estimate, it just says 250 miles of range. And then for the Model Y, it just says estimate, so similar to Model S. So X is the only one that says EPA estimate. The other sort of confounding piece about this variance is that the Model S was also updated to have new base wheels, the 19-inch Tempest wheels, which are more of an aerodynamic shape, more sidewall, than the previous base wheels for Model S, so presumably they're having an impact on this increased range for S, but these new wheels are not present on Model X, making that bigger increase in range on X even more interesting. Keeping this idea in mind for a second, I also want to go through some Elon tweets on this update. First, in the announcement, Elon tweeted, quote, Tesla Model S estimated EPA range is now above 390 miles, or about 630 kilometers, end quote. Emphasis on above, of course added by me. But he also adds that, quote, all S/X cars made in recent months have actually been above stated EPA range, will be unlocked soon for free via software update, end quote. This should come as no surprise, as Elon on the last couple of earnings calls has been saying that the S range has been understated. To what degree they have been understated, according to Elon, quote, depends on when car was built, as there are many small hardware improvements, so most will be somewhere in between 373 and 390, end quote. Thankfully, to some extent at least, Elon did answer the question of whether or not the 390 continues to be understated itself when somebody asked if it would take a lot to get the range past 400 miles. Elon said, quote, may be possible with improved wheels/tires, which would be available to all previously made cars, end quote. So putting all of this together, I think maybe the S range is slightly understated. Maybe it's like 392 or something, but it's not understated by a significant degree. Otherwise, it would make sense for Tesla to just push that estimate above 400 miles, which Elon seems to confirm here on Twitter. But we still have the open question of why the X got so much more benefit over the last few months from these numerous small improvements than the Model S did. Not being an engineer myself, I think pointing this out is probably as far as I'm going to get with the topic, but hopefully people can leave a little bit more informed speculation in the YouTube comments. My assumption would be that whatever these hardware adjustments were, they either had an outsized impact on the Model X due to its larger size and coefficient of drag and weight, things like that, or the design for the Model X just had more room for improvement, or some combination of those two factors. That doesn't tell me too much, but maybe collectively that can give us some insight into what some of these improvements may have been. There are a couple of strategic things here I want to discuss too, but first I want to recognize the incredible progress that Tesla has made on the Model S and the Model X in the last year. If we go back less than 12 months to Q1 of 2019, the range on the Model S at that point in time was 335 miles, and for the Model X, it was 295 miles. So the range on the Model S has increased 16% over the last year, and Model X by 19%. These are pretty crazy numbers, and these are without increasing the battery pack size. I don't think that can be emphasized enough. They did not add any energy. This is all efficiency gain. Maybe they've taken the buffer down, which would add more usable energy, but regardless, this is still incredible progress for 1 year on product lines that are for the Model S 8 years old and for the Model X 5 years old. This is why Elon Musk always pushes back on the idea that the S and the X need a refresh, because they have these constant updates that are making huge improvements to the vehicles. But people have just been conditioned for so long in the automotive market and even in other markets to only expect significant improvements, maybe not even significant improvements, but any sort of improvement when there are model year changes or when there is a redesign. And that is just not how Tesla operates. And that's a great thing, but because of that, I don't think Tesla quite gets the recognition and the credit they deserve for some of this tremendous progress that they're making. By the way, it's not just range that has improved over the last year. Tesla has also improved performance, with the long-range Model S going from a 4.1 second 0 to 60 down to 3.7 seconds now, and the Model X going from 4.7 seconds down to 4.4 seconds today. Oh, and by the way, if that weren't enough, they're actually cheaper now on average, with the Model X price declining $3,000 from $88,000 to $85,000, and the Model S only increasing by $1,000. So again, I just want to make sure this is all being recognized, and 2020 should be a really exciting year for these products as well, with the Plaid Powertrain coming, which Elon also shared a bit of an update on Twitter on Friday, in response to a tweet from Ryan McCaffrey of Ride the Lightning, on what the range for the Plaid Powertrain might look like, because Elon has said that it will have a larger battery pack. Elon said, quote, "There's a tough performance versus range trade-off. Plaid has absurd performance while holding range roughly constant," end quote. So we have been talking quite a bit about the potential for the Plaid Powertrain to Osborne S and X a little bit this year as people wait to see how that update impacts the entirety of the range for the vehicles. But hopefully this tweet can help mitigate some of that, and this range increase can pull demand through to the Plaid Powertrain update. I'm also not entirely convinced here that while what Elon is saying is true, that there is a trade-off between range and performance, that he's not just underselling it by a bit. I mentioned that I wanted to talk a little bit about the strategy here, and I think tactically Tesla played this range increase really well. We knew going back to the Q3 earnings call that Tesla was understating the range for the Model S, making it safe to assume the same for the Model X, and yet Tesla chose to wait until the middle of Q1 to make this update official. Couple points on this. First of all, we know that Q4 is the seasonally strongest quarter, and that Q1 is the seasonally weakest quarter. So to help smooth some of that out and make sure that Q1 demand is robust enough and avoid a situation like we ran into last year in Q1, it makes sense to slightly delay that official change and have it happen in Q1 to help boost demand, where it's much more likely to have an impact and may actually affect delivery numbers, versus making the change in Q4, where it probably doesn't actually have any impact on the quarter. Even if Tesla has more demand than they can currently handle for S and X, tactically, that's still a wise move just in case Tesla did not or does not have enough demand in Q1. The second important consideration here is that whenever Tesla does an update like this, you have people that just bought right before the update that then start to complain that they didn't get that new version, even though the day prior they were happy to pay that agreed upon price for the product that was delivered to them. But understandably, that is a frustrating situation for a customer to be in, and Tesla can alleviate some of that frustration by building in a little bit of that cushion between change and announcement. Summing up S and X then, I think incredible progress by Tesla over the last year that's probably not receiving the recognition or credit that it deserves. On that same thought, I wish there was more that could be done to help educate people on these massive changes that we have seen. And then strategically, I think really well handled by Tesla in terms of the timing of these changes and announcements. Next up today, a quick update on the Tesla Model 3. We do have a new software option available for the Standard Range Plus Model 3 vehicles, allowing access to the rear seat heaters for $300. We continue to see Tesla leverage these software options more and more. It's a good thing for margin. This is probably a pretty small impact if we assume that roughly half of Model 3s are the SR Plus version, and I don't know, maybe 25% or so convert on this option. You're looking at an additional maybe $3.5 to $4 million of profit, but that's per quarter. And because the hardware is already there, because Tesla includes it for production simplicity, this should all go straight to profit. So it is a small thing, but Tesla has a way of making these small things add up to be big things over time. Next is news on GM shutting down select operations in a headline that is quite misleading on their IR page. They say, quote, "GM accelerates transformation of international markets," end quote, with the bullet points reading, quote, "GM to cease Holden sales, design, and engineering operations by 2021, plans to focus on growth opportunities in specialty vehicles," end quote. Next bullet, quote, "GM and Great Wall Motors signed binding term sheet for sale of Thailand manufacturing plant," end quote. And then final bullet, quote, "Chevrolet to cease domestic sales in Thailand by end of 2020, end quote. So essentially GM here is ending production and sales in right-hand drive countries, Australia, New Zealand, and Thailand. We talked about one-time hits to earnings a lot in the Daimler episode. Here GM expects a similar quote-unquote one-time impact. They say, quote, "The company expects to record total cash and non-cash charges of $1.1 billion. These charges will primarily be incurred in the first quarter and continuing through the fourth quarter of 2020. These charges will be considered special for earnings before interest and tax adjusted, earnings per share diluted adjusted, and adjusted automotive free cash flow purposes," end quote. I don't have anything inherently against these one-time charges being backed out of the financials. Most businesses do something like that at some point. But with the pressure in the automotive industry right now, the question arises of how one-time are things like this going to be? How much divestment needs to occur? How much is that going to cost? Over what period of time? And how does that impact the automaker's ability to invest? Same thing with Daimler. They gave strong warnings in their earnings report to expect emissions-related fines over the next couple of years. You can adjust your numbers all you want, but that is still impacting your business, and in the case of Daimler, that's impacting their dividend as well. Speaking of dividends, we also have an update here from Renault. As I said in the Nissan episode on Friday, we should expect a cut here based on Nissan cutting their dividend, and that being a portion of Renault's profits. We now have Renault's earnings report, and they posted their first annual loss in a decade, losing about $150 million for the fiscal year of 2019. They also cut their dividend for the year from €3.55 last year to €1.10 this year. So a 69% reduction year over year. One other automaker I want to talk about today is Porsche, not because of earnings results, but we do have a couple of pieces of news on the Porsche Taycan. Unfortunately, we do have the first report of a fire with the Porsche Taycan. It apparently burned down inside of a garage. Locals are apparently saying that it exploded, but we don't have really many details on this yet. But Porsche did confirm to Electrek that it was a Taycan, and according to Electrek, quote, Porsche says that it is too early to speculate about the cause, but they are investigating the situation, end quote. Anybody that has followed Tesla for any length of time, I think, can have empathy for this situation. I think we should all wait to react until we get more details, as many times those details prove to be important, as we have learned with Tesla. I'll give them the benefit of the doubt for now, though obviously interested in the cause. Hopefully we'll learn more details about that later. The other news on the Taycan is that in a recent interview with MKBHD, Bill Gates announced that he is an owner of a Taycan and that it is his first electric vehicle, which was a bit surprising, a little bit dismaying to see, given the fact that the Roadster's been around for a decade and the Model S has been out since 2012. But Gates did credit Tesla a bit by saying if there was one company that you had to credit with starting all of this, that it would be Tesla. Pretty obvious, but at least some acknowledgement there. The last thing today, which I do expect to impact the overall markets when we open back up tomorrow, is some news from Apple. They announced that they are cutting their guidance for Q1 due to the impact of coronavirus. They had issued this guidance about 3 weeks ago on January 28th, and they are now saying, quote, work is starting to resume around the country, but we are experiencing a slower return to normal conditions than we had anticipated. As a result, we do not expect to meet the revenue guidance we provided for the March quarter due to two main factors, end quote. Those two factors are worldwide iPhone supply, which they expect to be temporarily constrained, and then demand for their products in general, specifically in China. So I do expect this to weigh on the markets and probably on Tesla tomorrow. Apple has a big impact on the market, and it can also influence the decisions of other companies too. They may decide to update their guidance as well, similarly to Apple, which could put a bit more pressure on the markets. So you never know, but definitely a red flag to keep an eye on for this week. Quick reminder before we close, I am in New York this week, so we're probably looking at Friday for the next episode, but we'll kind of play it by ear on that. Make sure you're following me on Twitter at Tesla Podcast in the interim. But as always, don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to sign up for notifications so you can definitely see when I am back, and I will see you soon. Thank you.